My hand trembled as I clutched the forged document, the ink blurring through the tears I could no longer hold back. There, before the judge, with the whole town watching, I discovered that my own husband had forged my signature to try and steal my mother's house. The humiliation burned my skin like a brand, but it was the look of contempt in Albert's eyes, the man who once swore to love and protect me, that shattered my heart into irreparable pieces. "You're nothing but a sentimental fool, Mary," he whispered in my ear as we left the courthouse, his voice laced with a venom I'd never noticed before. "That house should be ours. By right, your mother's a stubborn old woman who doesn't know what's best for the family." In that moment, I was no longer the love-struck woman who had walked down the aisle 5 years before. I was a stranger to myself, a puppet who had danced to the tune of a man I thought I knew. The ground seemed to open beneath my feet, swallowing not only my dignity, but all the years I had believed in a love that I now realized had been a carefully constructed facade. But to understand how I got there, I need to go back in time, to when I was a naive 22-year-old living in my mother, Celeste's house on the hill. That old house, with its arched windows and walls that held over a century of stories, was my universe. Every room held memories: the bedroom where I was born, the kitchen where my mother taught me to bake bread, the garden where I played as a child, imagining myself a princess in her castle. My mother had always been my rock. After my father died, a man tormented by depression, who chose to leave us when I was only 16, she became both father and mother to me. Celeste worked as a seamstress, her nimble fingers transforming scraps of fabric into wedding dresses, always with a smile on her face, even when bills piled up on the kitchen table. I'd sometimes see her late at night, calculating and recalculating expenses, biting her lower lip as she did when worried. "My sweet Marian," she'd say, stroking my hair, "this house has weathered many storms, but it's still standing. We're like it, strong, resilient." Her words were my safe harbor, and I believed it would always be that way. It was on one of those golden autumn afternoons that Albert entered our lives. He was a recently graduated lawyer, with a winning smile and words as sweet as honey. He came to us because we needed help with some paperwork for the house, bureaucratic issues my mother couldn't handle alone. From the first meeting, he showed a special interest in me, his dark eyes following me as I poured coffee, his words always filled with compliments and promises. "You deserve so much more than this simple life," he told me once, as we walked through the garden. "You deserve to travel, to see the world, to have the best of everything." His words resonated with my young, dreamy mind. I, who had never left our small town, began to imagine a different life, full of possibilities that Albert seemed willing to offer me. The courtship was a whirlwind of intense emotions. Albert showered me with expensive gifts, romantic dinners, and promises of a bright future by his side. My mother, always cautious, tried to warn me in her gentle way, "Daughter, true love doesn't need so much fanfare. Sometimes, the most beautiful things are in the simple gestures." But I was blind, completely enchanted by the possibility of a life that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. When Albert proposed, at a fancy restaurant in the neighboring town, with a ring that must have cost more than my mother earned in 6 months, I said yes without hesitation. Our honeymoon was in Paris, a dream I never imagined could become reality. Albert showed me the streets of the City of Lights, as if he owned the place, always reminding me that all of this was only possible because of him. "See how wonderful our life can be," he'd say, holding my hand as we looked at the Eiffel Tower. "We just need to be smart about our choices." For the first few months of marriage, I lived in a bubble of artificial happiness. Our apartment was modern and chic, completely different from the old house where I grew up. Albert liked to see me all dressed up, always impeccable, as if I were a porcelain doll in his private display case. He chose my clothes, decided where we would dine, and even controlled who I talked to at social events. "You don't understand these things, my love," he'd always say whenever I tried to express a different opinion. "Let me handle everything. Your only concern should be to be happy and make me happy." Gradually, the bubble began to burst. Visits to my mother became increasingly rare. Albert always had excuses: we had social engagements, he was very busy with work, or he simply thought I spent too much time lost in the past. When I insisted, he gave in, but made sure to show his displeasure throughout the visit. It was during one of these tense visits that I noticed how much my mother had aged. Her hands, once so firm in holding the needle, trembled slightly. Her eyes, which had always shone with determination, seemed tired. The house, without proper maintenance, was beginning to show signs of deterioration, leaks in the ceiling, peeling paint on the walls, an overgrown garden. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked, sitting beside her in the old wicker armchair on the porch. "I'm fine, honey. Just a little tired," she replied, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Things are tough. The clients aren't what they used to be. And this house, it needs so many repairs." That night, I talked to Albert about my mother's situation. To my surprise, he showed a sudden and unusual interest in the matter. "Your mother shouldn't be living alone in that old house," he said with a thoughtful expression. "Why doesn't she come live with us? Or better yet, why don't we sell the house and buy her a smaller apartment? It would be much more practical." The idea sent a strange chill down my spine. Sell the house where I was born, where I grew up, where my father had been happy before the illness consumed him. It was unthinkable. "Albert, that house is everything to my mother. It's our history, our family. Mary, you need to be more practical. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills." His voice had a cold tone I didn't recognize. "Your mother is old, she could fall, get hurt. That house is too big for her." In the following months, Albert intensified his campaign to convince my mother to sell the property. He frequently visited the house, always with logical and rational arguments about the benefits of selling the property. He talked about investments, security, practicality, always with that charming smile I knew so well. My mother, polite as ever, listened patiently, but her answer was invariably the same. "No, Albert, this house is not for sale." That's when things started to get tense. Albert began to frequently mention the expenses we had with my mother, medicines we bought, small repairs we paid for, groceries we brought when we visited. "It's not about the money," he said, "but your mother needs to understand that we're not a bank. If she sold the house, she would have enough money to support herself without depending on us." I started to feel guilty. Was my mother really being a financial burden? Was I being unfair to my husband, who worked so hard to support us? These thoughts consumed me, creating a fog of confusion in my mind. The situation became even more complicated when Albert started to insinuate that my mother was becoming senile. "Why does she maintain this unhealthy attachment to the house?" he questioned. "It's not normal for a person her age to be so stubborn. Maybe she needs medical help." His words planted seeds of doubt in my mind. I, who knew my mother better than anyone, began to question my own judgment. When she refused to discuss selling the house, I wondered if it was really stubbornness or if there was something more. It was during this turbulent period that I discovered I was pregnant. The news should have been a reason for pure joy, but it came accompanied by an inexplicable anguish. Albert was ecstatic, immediately talking about the need to prepare for the family's future. "Now more than ever, Mary, we need to be practical," he said, holding my hand with an almost desperate intensity. "A baby changes everything. We need financial security, and your mother's house could be exactly what we need to secure our child's future." The pregnancy passed like a hazy dream. I was physically present, but emotionally distant from everything. The constant nausea was nothing compared to the malaise I felt whenever Albert mentioned the house. He had become obsessed with the subject, and I felt trapped between my love for my husband and my loyalty to my mother. During the 7th month of gestation, I lost the baby. It was a dawn of indescribable pain, not only physical but emotional. Albert was traveling for work, and it was my mother who found me bleeding in the bathroom. It was she who took me to the hospital. It was she who held my hand while the doctor confirmed what my heart already knew. "My daughter," she whispered as I cried in her arms, "sometimes life takes away precious things to teach us what really matters." When Albert returned from his trip, 2 days later, his reaction shocked me. Of course, he showed sadness, hugged me, said the right words. But a few days later, he was again talking about the house. "Maybe it's a sign," he said, with a casualness that chilled me to the bone. "Without the baby, we don't need to worry so much about the immediate future. But still, Mary, your mother can't live in that house forever. What if something happens to her? What if she falls, gets hurt, and we're not there? It was at that moment that something inside me began to awaken. An inner voice, muffled for years of subtle manipulation, began to whisper uncomfortable truths. Why was Albert so obsessed with the house? Why was his concern for my mother always centered around the property? I started paying more attention to the details. I noticed how Albert always looked away when my mother talked about my father, how he changed the subject when she mentioned family memories. I realized he had never asked about the history of the house, about my grandparents, about the family traditions that meant so much to us. For him, that house wasn't a home filled with history and love, it was just a financial asset waiting to be liquidated. The revelation came unexpectedly, during a casual conversation with Mrs. Rose, our oldest neighbor. She had been a close friend of my grandmother and knew all the family secrets. "Mary, dear," she said, as we had coffee in her kitchen, "do you know about the special clause in the house deed?" My heart pounded. What clause? Your great-grandmother, Maria Antonia, when she left the house to the family, included a very specific condition. If your mother died without direct heirs, or if she was considered unable to take care of the property, the house would automatically pass to Joaquim, the distant cousin who lives in Sao Paulo. The world spun. But I'm the direct heir. Yes, but only if you're living in the house, or if your mother transfers ownership to you while she's still alive and competent. If she's declared incompetent for any reason, Dona Rosa let the sentence hang, but I understood perfectly. That night, I couldn't sleep. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a terrifying way. Albert didn't want my mother to sell the house, he wanted her declared incompetent to manage it. That's why the insinuations about senility, the constant pressure, the sudden interest in our family situation. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite grasp. Why was he so confident he'd get the house even with the clause? What did he know that I didn't? The answer came even more shockingly. A few days later, while Albert was in the shower, his phone rang. Without thinking, I answered. "Albert, this is Joaquim. How are the plans going? My wife's getting anxious to move." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, he can't come to the phone right now. Can I take a message?" "Sure, just tell him I have the documents ready. As soon as his mother-in-law is declared incompetent, we can proceed with the transfer. The split will be 50-50, as we agreed." I hung up, my hands trembling. Albert had made a deal with Joaquim. They planned to split the house's value after they managed to take it from my mother. Everything made sense now. The psychological pressure, the insinuations about her mental capacity, even the suggestion that she needed medical help. But I still didn't know the worst. That same week, while organizing Albert's papers to help him with his taxes, I found a hidden folder in the back of his drawer. Inside were documents that made me question everything I thought I knew about my husband. There was a power of attorney with my mother's signature, a signature I knew she'd never written. There was also correspondence between Albert and Joaquim, dating back months, detailing the plan to take control of the property. And worst of all, there was a forged medical report, signed by a doctor I'd never heard of, declaring my mother mentally incompetent. At that moment, sitting in the study of the man I had loved and blindly trusted, I understood that my whole life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. Albert hadn't fallen in love with me. He'd fallen in love with my family's house. Our marriage, our honeymoon, even his reaction to the loss of our baby, everything had been calculated to achieve this goal. The pain I felt at that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was the pain of discovering that my own life had been reduced to a business transaction. But along with the pain came something I hadn't expected, a cold, determined anger. A clarity of mind I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since my marriage, I knew exactly what I needed to do. If you're following this story, and identifying with these profound emotions of betrayal and overcoming, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving accounts like true stories of women who found strength where they thought there was only weakness. That night, I pretended to be asleep when Albert came home. I watched him through half-closed eyelids as he discreetly checked if I'd touched his papers. His satisfied expression told me everything I needed to know. He thought he was safe, that his charade was still working perfectly. The next day, I visited my mother alone for the first time in months. She was in the garden, trying to revive a rosebush that looked like it had seen better days. When she saw me, her face lit up with that warm smile I'd missed so much. "My sweet Marion. What a wonderful surprise. Where's Albert?" "Mom, we need to talk." My voice came out more serious than I intended, and I saw worry settle in her eyes. We sat on the porch, in the same spot where we'd shared so many secrets and dreams. Heartbroken but clear-headed, I told her everything I'd discovered. I showed her the documents, explained about Joaquim, about the plan to declare her incompetent. My mother listened in silence, her hands slowly clenching as the truth unfolded. When I finished, she remained silent for long minutes, gazing at the house that had been her home all her life. "I knew," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "I didn't know the details, but I knew something was wrong. A mother senses these things, Mary. I saw how you changed after you got married, how you became smaller, more insecure. I saw how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. It wasn't love, it was possession." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. "Why didn't you ever tell me anything?" "Because you needed to find out on your own. If I'd said anything, you would have thought it was just motherly jealousy, that I didn't want you to be happy." She held my hand firmly. "But now that you know the truth, what are we going to do?" That's when my mother showed me something I'd never seen. From the dusty trunk in the attic, she pulled out a series of old documents, letters, photographs, deeds, and there, among the papers yellowed with age, was proof that Albert had made a crucial mistake in his calculations. The house hadn't been left to my great-grandmother through a standard will. It had been a special gift, bestowed by the government of the time to my great-great-grandfather, a doctor who'd saved dozens of lives during an epidemic. The condition of the donation was clear. The property had to remain in the direct family forever, and any attempt to defraud this condition would result in the automatic loss of all rights to the property. More than that, there was a special protective clause. If anyone tried to use fraudulent means to take control of the property, all forged documents would be automatically void, and the person responsible for the fraud would lose any present or future rights to the property. "Albert doesn't know about these documents," my mother explained. "They've been safely stored for decades. Your great-grandmother made me promise I'd only show them if someone tried to steal our house." That night, we had a long talk about what to do. I wanted to confront Albert immediately, expose his betrayal, and end it all at once. But my mother, with her years of wisdom, suggested something different. "Let him hang himself," she said. "If we confront him now, he might destroy evidence, invent excuses, or even run away. But if we let him continue with his plan, we'll have irrefutable proof of his intentions." That's how we began our own investigation. In the following days, we documented Albert's every move, every suspicious call, every visit to places that didn't make sense in his normal routine. We discovered he'd met with Joaquim several times, that he'd paid for the forged medical report, that he'd even hired a lawyer specializing in inheritance disputes. The most shocking discovery was that he'd lied about his financial situation. Our elegant apartment, our imported car, our luxurious life, it was all being paid for with loans and credit cards. Albert was deeply in debt, and my mother's house was his only hope of settling his debts. During this period of investigation, something extraordinary happened to me. For the first time in years, I felt alive, whole, powerful. I was no longer the submissive wife, who accepted everything without question. I had a purpose, a mission, and it gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I also rediscovered my connection with my mother. Working together on this investigation, I remembered why she had always been my hero. Her sharp intelligence, her ability to read people, her quiet determination, all the qualities Albert had been trying to make me forget. The final confrontation happened exactly as my mother had predicted. Albert, confident that his deception was working perfectly, decided to accelerate the process. He arrived home one night, with official papers declaring my mother incapacitated, and announced that the next day we would go to the registry office to resolve the situation. "It's for her own good, Mary," he said, with that false smile I now recognized perfectly. "She'll be much happier in a place more suitable for people her age." That's when I knew the time had come. "Albert," I said, keeping my voice calm. Before we go to the registry office, there are a few things you need to know. I placed on the living room table all the documents we had gathered, the recordings of his calls with Joaquin, the proof of his real financial situation, the old house documents, and finally the forged power of attorney that he thought I'd never seen. I watched his face grow progressively paler as he recognized each document. His eyes, which had once captivated me, now revealed only panic and despair. "Mary, I can explain," he began, but I interrupted him. "There's nothing to explain, Albert. I know everything. I know about Joaquin. I know about the forged documents. I know about your debts. I know you married me just to gain access to my family's house." The mask finally fell. The charming and manipulative man disappeared, revealing someone I didn't recognize, or perhaps someone I was finally seeing for the first time. "So what?" he yelled, completely losing control. "Do you think I was going to spend my whole life pretending to love a naive country bumpkin like you? That house is worth a fortune, and you two are too dumb to realize it." His words were like daggers, but strangely, they didn't hurt me as I expected. Instead of pain, I felt a kind of relief. Finally, I was seeing who Albert really was. "The house is worth nothing to you," I replied, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. "Because you'll never get your hands on it. And our marriage is over." He tried to intimidate me, tried to blackmail me, even tried to physically threaten me. But I was no longer the fragile and insecure woman he had molded. When he approached me menacingly, I didn't flinch. "If you lay a finger on me," I said, looking directly into his eyes, "I'll have even more evidence to use against you in court." The next day, accompanied by my mother and a real lawyer, not an accomplice like Albert, I went to the police station to file a complaint for forgery and attempted fraud. The evidence was irrefutable, and Albert was arrested that same afternoon. The trial was swift and devastating for him. In addition to imprisonment, he was forced to pay a hefty fine and lost his right to practice law. Joaquin, as an accomplice, also faced legal consequences. But the real victory wasn't legal, it was personal. When I left the courthouse on that final day, I was no longer the same woman who had discovered the betrayal months before. I had regained my strength, my dignity, my ability to trust myself. I had rediscovered the value of my family, my history, my roots. I moved back into my mother's house, not out of necessity, but by choice. Together, we restored not just the property, but our relationship. Each room we renovated was like healing a wound. Each antique piece of furniture we recovered was like reclaiming a piece of our identity. I learned that true love doesn't diminish you, it amplifies you. I learned that true family isn't just who you choose, but who chooses you back, unconditionally. I learned that sometimes we need to lose everything we thought we wanted to discover what we truly need. Today, when I look at the old house on the hill, I see not just walls and shingles, but a fortress of memories, love and resilience. I see generations of strong women who faced storms and remained standing. I see my great-grandmother, Maria Antonia, who dreamed of an eternal home for her family. I see my mother, Celeste, who guarded this home fiercely, and I see myself, finally worthy of being a part of this lineage of warriors. Albert tried to reduce me to a means to an end. He tried to make me believe I was small, dependent, incapable of making my own decisions. But he was fundamentally wrong about one thing. He underestimated the power of a woman rediscovering her own worth. I don't hold a grudge against him, because resentment would be giving him a power over me that he doesn't deserve. Instead, I hold gratitude, not for him, but for the experience that taught me the difference between someone who loves you for who you are, and someone who wants you for what you have. Now every morning, I wake up in the same house where I was born, but as a completely new person. I wake up next to my mother, my best friend, and my greatest inspiration. I wake up knowing that I belong to a line of women who never bowed down to adversity, and whenever I pass by the garden where my great-grandmother planted the first roses,